Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Harder Not Smarter podcast. Today's guest is Nick Lavery, a absolute phenomenon of a individual within the military. He's an accomplished Green Beret, combat wounded warrior, founder of Team Machine, and is known for his remarkable resilience and leadership. Not only overcome immense physical and mental challenges, but has decided to dedicate his life to empowering others. Despite facing life-altering injuries, he returned to active duty, becoming the first Green Beret to return to combat as an above-the-knee amputee. And through Team Machine, Nick channels his experience and knowledge to inspire, train, and develop elite performers in both the military and civilian spheres. And this is where it really starts getting interesting with this stuff. His exemplary military career has been recognized with numerous awards, including the Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts, 3 Bronze Stars with V, the OSS Society, Peter Oritz Award, Bruce Price Leadership Award, and the Special Operations Command Excalibur Award. And he's been on Jocko, Sean Ryan, Lewis Howes, Danger Close, and Cleared Hot. So Nick has an incredible story. People love hearing it. And it's an important message to be getting out to the broader audience about adversity and being able to overcome life's challenges. So Nick, thank you and welcome.
I appreciate it, Kev. Thanks for the warm introduction and the opportunity to spend some time together. I'm looking forward to it.
Our pleasure. So
Kevin, you need to watch those thumbs, man. You got like all those bubbles like popping up. I wonder if it's going to show up in the.
Yes, dude. Get the fuck out of here! I didn't even look at this. You guys are all kinds of high speed. Fireworks are going off and shit.
If you're on YouTube, you're getting a treat. So jump over the YouTube channel. You can see all the explosions. I don't know what's going on with all the new settings. Apparently, if you give 2 thumbs up, you get big explosions. If you get 1 thumb up, you get the bubble. Oh, there it is. I don't even know what's going on anymore.
Good stuff.
Really changed the mood of the conversation.
That's good.
So Nick, you have had an extensive career in the Green Berets. That Greg was a Green Beret as well. I've worked a lot with you guys. Tell us about what happened that day that you took this injury.
Yeah, man, we were getting ready to head out onto an op towards the back end of about 6-month rotation. So we only had a couple weeks or so left before we were scheduled to rip out. And prior to launching from our outstation, a member of the Afghan National Police Force, which was a guy that we've been working with actually for months, jumped up on the back of a Ford Ranger pickup truck that had a mounted PKM belt-fed machine gun attached to it and opened fire into me and my teammates from about 25 or so feet away. And, you guys are familiar with what a PKM can do. And, most wouldn't know, which is understandable. But those that are clueless as to what that means, it's a highly powerful Russian-made belt-fed machine gun that, can chew a vehicle to shreds from 500 meters really all day long. So, against human flesh from that kind of range, it's catastrophic. There were 12 U.S. casualties total, 3 of which were killed, another 10 or 11 or so Afghan casualties killed or wounded, myself and other 8 Americans, just varying degrees of critically wounded. And most of the damage to me was to my right leg. I took an estimated 5 or maybe 6 rounds to my right leg alone, and it basically vaporized it. And to make matters just more interesting, that was the initiation of a pre-planned complex ambush. We didn't know there were about 30 Taliban fighters that had our compound almost entirely surrounded. So this dude cracked off from the from interior of our position, and then all the other guys kind of began joining in with small mortars and RPG rockets and machine gun. So a real rough day, at the office. I treated myself initially while the guys that were still upright obviously went to work and repelling that ambush. So I treated myself with a series of tourniquets, an internal pressure dressing, which is a really odd thing to do on yourself. And, it ended up being about over an hour and a half before I could eventually get medevaced. My femur was shattered. My femoral artery was severed. I mean, I really should have died that day. Obviously, I'm here talking to you. So, I had some great people around me, not just on the site, but then, at some of these locations I got sent to, amazing medical personnel. And I believe a higher power also being involved in that. It's just my choice to believe in that. And, so caught a few breaks, had great training. A lot of things fell into the right place for me to be able to be here with you having this conversation today.
How many tourniquets did you put on? You're not exactly a small guy, Nick.
I put on 2, and then one of my teammates eventually got to me and put on a third.
Yeah, that's pretty typical for a big guy.
Yeah.
Pretty much any GB. Incredible, man.
Yeah.
Where was that in Afghanistan?
Wardak.
Yeah, Wardak is nasty.
Which is known for, really going back to like the beginning of time almost, known for its resilient fighters and challenging terrain. So, I mean, we knew we were going to get dropped off into a hornet's nest. And at the time, we were doing what was referred to as VSO, which, Greg, I'm sure you're familiar with. Kev, you're probably familiar with it too. Village Stability Operations, which on paper, it briefs really well and it makes complete sense. And it's really what I would say is kind of the most quintessential, authentic Special Forces ODA mission. It's exactly what you want. It's like, we're going to just send you out there and actually put some limitations on how big of an infrastructure you can create. We're intentionally going to prevent building these massive bases and FOBs because the idea is we're going to transition out. And if we build something too big or too complex, then our partner force will be incapable of maintaining it. And we're basically just building infrastructure to hand over to the enemy at some point. So we're going to keep all that to an absolute minimum, which we love. And then in reality, of course, that comes with some pretty significant risks and potential consequences.
Yeah, and the SEAL teams, we had a lot of those operations as well, where you're getting dropped in areas and just building out these infrastructures from the ground up. The partner forces, you needed to get out there and learn about them, build the relationships with them, and as you realize, you think these groups, you think you have a good beat on their priorities and their agenda and their allegiances, essentially. But whether it's them being able to put on a facade the entire time, or if they were put in a situation where their family is now jeopardized and they need to make a decision, do I choose my partner force, or do I choose my family, which is now either held captive or the enemy knows who I am and they've made it known that they know where my family is. And it puts these guys in very precarious situations that ultimately, oftentimes they side with their family. And as we've shown repeatedly now between Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq, we're eventually going to leave. And so it sets a bad precedence for them to, they're going to essentially choose a side that's going to be there longer. The Taliban's going to be there longer than us. The ISIS guys are going to be there longer than us. In Vietnam, the North Korea or the North Vietnamese are going to be there longer than us. And so it puts the soldiers on the ground in a very precarious situation.
Yeah, it's a tough spot. And I can tell you, and the dude that shot me up and killed a few of my buddies that day was put in that exact scenario. And literally 9 Taliban fighters barged into his house in the middle of the night. And this dude was married with, I think, 6 kids. And they said, hey, dude, here's the deal. You got 2 options. Option A is you're going to do this attack for us when we tell you to. And option B is we're going to brutalize your entire family right now in front of you. And then we're going to slaughter them. And then we're going to slaughter you. Either way, within this equation, you're dead. But if you choose option B, we'll ensure your family is taken care of. And what made this tactic work was they would follow through on that. And they actually would take care of their families. And they built up a sense of credibility over the years having done this. And when that was made known to me, when my teammates finally got back to the States, I was at Walter Reed and they came to visit me and they told me the intel that they had found. I was like, listen, I didn't have the family that I have today back then, but I could still empathize with that guy in being in that position and being put in an impossible decision to make. Mm-hmm. Had I been put in that position without any real practical way to fight back, and a lot of these alpha tough guys are like, I just would have killed them all. It's like, now you wouldn't have. You can think that all day long, but you are wildly outgunned and outmanned, and you have a decision to make right now with 6 of your children sitting right next to you. If I'm put in that position today, literally right now in that world, I'm doing the exact same thing. I would go to some pretty extreme lengths to protect my family. So once I was made aware of that, it just allowed me to release all this kind of anger and rage and this sentiment of betrayal that was just like crushing me. It was in that moment I was like, you know what, dude, like I totally get it. I would have done the same thing. No hard feelings, and I can move on with my life.
That's a remarkable mindset to have, and a real sense of maturity and awareness about yourself, that you're able to take this information. You just lost your leg, probably lost a lot of friends, and your view of the world is destabilized. You know, you just got betrayed by the guys that you've been working with for however many months you've been out there. Be able to take that information in and see it for what it really is. Like, this guy wasn't trying to do you harm. He wasn't trying to betray you. He was put in a shitty situation. And now you're able to move beyond that trauma, that rage, that hate, you know, all the stage phases of recovery, and move past that so much quicker, which I'm sure had tremendous effect on your, man, those thumbs.
Fucking thumbs, man.
Had a tremendous effect on your ability to actually physically recover and move beyond to where you're able to become operational again. Walk us through what that was like. You know, initially, you know, coming out of the surgery, having your leg removed, being told from the doctors what that recovery process is going to look like. I'm sure that they gave you a very conservative one. You're probably never going to go back to work again. You're probably going to have a lot of difficulty walking. What did their initial prognosis sound like to you?
Yeah, I can tell you. And I was in the intensive care unit at Walter Reed for probably a day. And when I arrived, my mother, my father, my youngest sister, they were all there. And within the first day or so, I remember the chief ortho surgeon coming in, and I'm whacked out of my mind. I'm on ketamine and Dilaudid, and like I barely know what's going on. But I'll never forget this conversation. And he said, "Hey man, here's the deal." He's like, "Your leg is riddled with all of the infection and bacteria, and even probably some shit that we don't even know what it is, that's like growing in you right now. And any one of these things could literally kill you." He's like, "My staff, which are all waiting outside of your room literally right now, they want to take you into the operating room and they want to amputate your leg at the hip. So a hip disarticulation, and just get rid of the threat to your life immediately and getting you move forward with life." He's like, "But I think I can save more of your leg." And he goes, "It's just going to be a street fight, and I need you in this fight with me." And I think I may have comprehended like 7 words out of what that guy had just told me. But what I did register was basically, "I want to go get into a street fight and I'd like you to come with me." And I'm like, "Let's fucking do that." And like, that's really what it was. And then that began my journey. So I ended up going through what would be about 40 surgeries on my right leg, usually like 3 or 4 times a week. I was in the OR, and they were just incrementally amputating it chunk by chunk, pumping me full of antibiotics to try to get the infection under control. So it was just this roller coaster ride of in and out of surgeries countless times a week for like 7 or 8 weeks, until they eventually got the infection under control and left me with the limb that I have today, which is a femur that's about 4 inches long, which is really short. So I'm considered a really high above the knee amputee, where I have just enough length where I can operate as an above the knee amputee versus as a hip disartic, which are like 2 entirely different worlds in terms of functionality and things that you can practically do and to what degree you can do them. But I'm just so grateful for that guy and his willingness to take a risk, and because it could have gone the other way. I mean, he could have tried to do this, and then I could have dropped dead, and he would have had a whole lot of people to answer to, being like, "Dude, what were you thinking? You had your whole staff of advisors and fellow surgeons that were telling you this is the right answer, and you said like, fuck that, I'm going to do this." Like, it could have gone another direction for sure. But had he not done that, as much as I live in the world of possibility, and I do believe anything is possible, man, it would have been as close to impossible as it gets for me to go back to doing what I've been doing now since being wounded as a hip disartic versus as an above the knee. So to say I'm grateful for that guy and his willingness to take a risk on me and his career and his reputation would be a dramatic understatement. And that's what that looked like in the beginning, man. But, eventually, once they got the infection wrapped up, kind of just began my basic, recovery process, working with a prosthetist and a physical therapist and occupational therapist, and having to, kind of learn how to live life as a one-legged guy. And it's one thing to learn something new. It's something entirely different to have to forget how you used to do something that's become so automated. I mean, I was 30 years old. That's about 29 years of walking around this earth on two legs, give or take however many months. You got to unlearn a lot of shit. And it's not just walking, it's like like getting out of a bed, or just like basic human function, getting yourself dressed, bathing yourself, eating. Like you have to kind of wipe the canvas clean a little bit and then start repainting it kind of at the same time. And that's certainly a challenge, but we are so fortunate to have so many amazing people at a place like Walter Reed, which is a place I describe as the greatest place on earth that you never want to see. And I use it that way because chances are, if you're at Walter Reed, aside from being a service member who that's where you're stationed, that's what you work. But if you're at Walter Reed, odds are it's because something pretty bad has happened to somebody. That's why you're there. But if you do get a chance to go and spend some time there, man, we are just so fortunate as Americans and as American service members to have that degree of assets and talent and resources, all volunteers that asked to go do these really nasty, hard jobs. And they do it with a smile on their face, almost with this like aura around them. To me, it's a location that proves angels exist. I've seen them with my own eyes by virtue of the people that took care of me for the year that I was at Walter Reed. And without them, I would have had zero shot of being able to get back to doing what I love to do.
At what point did you realize that you were going to, was there ever a doubt in your mind that you were going to leave the military or stay in the military? Was that always the goal?
Yeah, it's a good question, Greg. So the short answer is it was the goal from the time I was in the intensive care unit. And I'll share a quick story that really I think emphasizes that. And I'm going to ask us all in this room and those listening to keep any sort of like political opinions aside while I share this story. That's a request that I have. And again, I'm in ICU, critical condition, in and out of surgery. I'm on ketamine, Dilaudid, in and out anesthesia. Like I barely know what's going on. And at one point, a bunch of people in black suits all walk into my room. And I'm thinking I'm about to be abducted by aliens. I think that's what's about to happen. And then, sure enough, 5 minutes later, the first lady walks in, which at the time was Michelle Obama. And there's no mistaking her, so I knew right away. I didn't really know who else was in the room. Like, I think that's my dad. I think that's my mother. That's definitely the first lady. And, she comes over to my bedside and she's talking to me. And I have no idea what she's really saying. I'm kind of like mumbling and stuttering some just like nonsensical gibberish back to her. So she kind of diverts her attention off of me and she starts talking to my mother, who's kind of at the foot of my bed. So the two of them were having this conversation basically right on top of me. And at some point I interrupt her and I said, ma'am, can you do me a favor? And she was like startled that I even said anything that she could understand. So she kind of jumps back and then she leans in and she gets really close. She's like a foot off my face. And I was like, I need you to tell your husband that I am still an asset, that I will be back, and please don't give up on me. And she starts crying. And, so my mother starts crying. She's crying. I think the Secret Service agents were crying. Like it was this like emotional moment for everyone in the room, aside from me. I was dead ass serious. Like I literally just saw this as a strategic opportunity to get a message to the guy. And I had been in the military long enough to know that anything is waverable as long as the right person puts the name on the right piece of paper. And I'm like, well, shit, maybe he won't listen to the generals, but maybe he'll listen to his wife. And if I can like get this into his ear now, I think that may help me down the road. But when I certainly face some administrative challenges, then I know I'm going to have to work through. And I share that story because it's laughable. We can enjoy it and it's funny. But I think at least it paints a good image and depiction of where my mentality was, even at that early stage of the game. Dude, at this point, guys, and things have changed for me since then. This is 11 years ago. But at that point in my life, being a Green Beret, being a war fighter, a service member on behalf of a nation wasn't really what I did. It was who I was. Like my entire identity was wrapped in that function. And I saw it as like, you got two options, man. You either roll over and die, or you go back to being who you were put on this planet to be. And that was it. And so it was a relatively easy decision for me to make. Rolling over and dying is just something that doesn't sit well with me. So it's like, cool, all roads proceed to this. Of course, not a clue as to how, and it was a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be, but the decision was made even back then.
And
Oh,
at
yeah,
what
man.
point were you journaling through the recovery process, making notes of all this stuff? I mean, obviously you have the best-selling book, Objective Secure. You talk a lot about your trials and tribulations, trying to get back in the fight. Were you planning to have a to document the story, or did you come to a point and realize that the message you have is powerful that other people should hear, and now you're trying to go back and think about what that process was like?
Oh yeah, dude, zero plan or intent to share any of this with anybody whatsoever, and not even nothing on the radar in terms of I'm going to document this strategically. So actually, to prove that point, my father stayed with me at the hospital for the first 6 months I was there, and anytime he had a camera pointed at me, I would literally snap at him to like get the fuck away from me. Whether I was in the gym or working with the PT, I'm like, dude, I'm here to work, and you are distracting me. And he did a little bit, which I'm glad, because I can look back now and go, man, it's really cool to have some of these moments documented. But you can see him like hiding behind like a pylon in a room, trying to like get a shot of me before I saw him and would like snap at him. So no, but to answer your question, Kev, my logging, and I'm a huge journaler now. I'm in my journal now, usually like 4 to 5 times a week. But that wasn't a practice I had back then. But I had grown up as an athlete. I played football in college. So like tracking my training was something I had been doing for years. So like sets, reps, grams of protein, like all your typical kind of meathead data points that you would want, max effort, deadlift, whatever. So I'm doing that. That's just part of my operating routine. Okay. So I'm doing that during my recovery. But then I also realized I started making notes on, kind of how much sleep I was getting and what my mood was like, and like how am I feeling, and kind of some of these more intangibles outside of hard performance metrics. And I noticed that when I would go back into my log after a month or two and kind of check my numbers, I was really paying attention to some of those intangibles, because it relates to performance, like your stress levels and how much sleep you're getting, and your mood and your ability to focus, and what's irritating you is related directly to physical performance. So it was all about physical performance. It was all about being capable. But I learned that those data points had value. So over time, it really morphed into kind of its own thing, where I have my training log and I've got my journal, and I use them both for like 2 separate purposes. But it really didn't begin as any kind of like therapeutic value. That happened, but how I got into doing that was purely based off of human performance, to increase what I could do, what I could physically do with my body.
And tell me about the overall message of the book. Who are you trying to reach out to? Who are you trying to inspire and show that there's change you can make in your life?
Objective Secure casts a pretty wide net, and in fact, it kind of goes against a lot of like business strategy principles, where you kind of want to know your market and know your niche and kind of like target them. I wrote Objective Secure without any sense of becoming an entrepreneur and like starting a business. It was really the result of me being asked the question, a dozen times, and then 100 times, and then thousands of times, like, how did you do this? Or how do you do that? And that's the result of having gone through all this and getting back to the teams, and then getting back into combat, and then people being curious as to like, how does that work? And so I was answering that question to people through the internet, social media, and then I just decided at one point that I would come up with a much better, well thought out answer to that question. And I spent a few weeks, and I just basically put together an outline that answered that question. And shit, even just during the process of documenting that, I really learned quite a bit about myself, because I was asking myself those same questions, like, well, how did you do that? Or like, this is the things that you were doing, but why were you doing that? And having conversations with strength coaches and teammates and leadership, family members. And like, the more I was answering the question, the more questions I began to have. So it just kept kind of growing. And it really remained as like a 10, 12 page document that I would just share with people when they would say like, hey, how'd you do this? Or how do you do that? Or whatever. I'd be like, boom, copy paste, here you go. And had it not been for 2020 and, for us all being locked in our homes we obviously all know why, Objective Secure probably wouldn't exist, at least the way it is now and for how long it has existed now. And that really was just a window of opportunity that I decided to pour into expounding upon that template that I had built, because most of the things that I would normally be doing in a day suddenly became non-options. Like the gyms are closed, the jiu-jitsu fight houses are closed. Like we're doing these weird, like half on, half off work schedule shit. Like, all trying to figure out how to like effectively train as active duty Green Berets through Zoom and all this other shit. So like there's a lot of time I had on my hands that I probably wouldn't have, that I just invested into writing. This was in July of 2020 that I decided to take a shot at creating an actual book, or at least a manuscript. I was going back into Iraq in early December. So I gave myself basically that window just to see what I could come up with. And I really lost my mind. I became like obsessed with this thing, where I was jumping out of bed at like 2 a.m. and I just had to get these words out. And fast forward like 3.5 months or so, and I'm staring at 75,000 words on a Microsoft Word document. I'm like, what the hell just happened? Like, I don't know. I just blacked out. I don't know what just took place. And what I can tell you to answer your question a little more concisely is it really it's a guide to goal achievement, which is the subtitle. If you're looking for the Nick Lavery story or like an autobiography, you're going to be wildly disappointed, because that is not what Objective Secure is about. And yes, I do share little clips of examples of some things that I've been through, but really those little short stories are there just to provide a little bit of context to what the point of that section is. It's how did I do what I did, broken down into 2 sections. Section 1 being the mindset, and section 2 being the strategy and the tactics and the X's and O's and the sets and reps and the grams of protein and the things that people usually want to know. But I stand by this, where if you were to have a perfect plan, if one were to exist, I would argue it would be entirely irrelevant without the mindset to drive that strategy and to drive those tactics. And now we're talking about things like discipline and resilience and persistence and these terms that we're all familiar with. I just use that book as a tool to really extract like what that actually means, and then give some recommendations onto how to actually build those up as part of our operating system. And I'll tell you, I'll stop here. I mean, I wrote that book as an active duty Green Beret. I still am one. I use those tools and philosophies and tactics and techniques as part of my day-to-day life as a soldier. But I can tell you that as a husband, as a father, as an entrepreneur, I use those exact same concepts in the other areas of my life, at least to the same degree as I do as a service member.
That's incredible. And it almost sounds like you did the reverse of how a lot of people get into entrepreneurship. A lot of people, they start the business and then they start talking, and then based off those talking points, they create a book. It almost sounds like you did the reverse of that, where you wrote the book, like, oh, this is something powerful here. Start talking about it, providing insight, and then built a business around the book that was really just your philosophy on life to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's accurate, because I can tell you there was no business model in place or like entrepreneurship like strategy. It was like, I mean, one of the biggest unfortunate truths as human beings that I believe to be true wholeheartedly is most people will go through life without ever knowing what they are truly capable of. And I think that that's sad. I think that that's unfortunate, because a lot of that capacity is within all of us literally right now. And, for many, it requires hitting this kind of rock bottom or hitting some kind of traumatic, holy shit event that kind of opens up your eyes to being like, man, I mean, I need to find another gear. Otherwise I may die. I mean, literally may die. Or just continue down this death spiral towards death. For many, that's what it takes. And that's what it took for me, was losing my leg, but more significantly, being face to face with death. I should absolutely be dead. Mm-hmm. And when I decided to go back to the teams, despite being a one-legged guy, the only way that would even be remotely possible was I have to find a whole nother level, multiple other levels in discipline and work ethic and consistency, and who is on my team, who's in my community that I rely on, who are the energy drainers that are in my life that I absolutely have to just get rid of and be hyper focused on this one mission. When you bring that in, like an obsession towards something coupled with extreme adversity, I would argue for many, that is the catalyst that unlocks some of this pre-existing potential. Because the truth is, and I got plenty of accomplishments as a two-legged guy that I'm certainly proud of, but it's not like when I was at Walter Reed, some like weirdo scientist walked into my room and shoved a metal spike in the back of my head and uploaded another degree of discipline, right? Like that clearly didn't happen. There wasn't like a sci-fi matrix scenario going on in my hospital room. All that stuff was already there. I just had to realize it existed and then have a strong enough reason as to why I would tap into it. But I do believe that once a human being starts to recognize their existing potential and gain more control of it, that creates this cascading effect where it's like, damn, I didn't even know what I could do, and look what I just did. What else can I do? What's the next metric? What's the next objective? What's the next really hard thing that still scares the shit out of me, but maybe it scares me just a little bit less. Or maybe despite that fear, I'm willing to do it anyway because I'm just that curious to know if I'm capable of doing it. That starts to become a person's new operating system. And being someone who can help enable and empower and inspire and teach others to do that is something that just, it gets me up in the morning nowadays, man. And so as much as I love being a service member and I'm passionate about it, my second professional life now, the more I get to do it, the more I'm falling in love with that. And, my mission really, and I speak for my entire team when I say we want to create a dent, we will continue to create a dent in those that would have otherwise lived their entire life without even having a glimpse at just how capable they could actually be.
What's that line? The worst hell you can experience is seeing the life that you could have become or the potential that you could have been. Seeing what you could have become in life if you had just applied yourself. It's pretty disappointing to see how little a lot of people are willing to put in effort, to sacrifice, to struggle a little bit. We become very conditioned, I guess you can say, to immediate satisfaction, immediate gratification. The podcast is a prime example. I think 90% of podcasts don't make it past their third episode, and 90% of the ones that do don't make it past the 20th. You're not going to become Joe Rogan in the first month, in the first year, probably not even in the first 5 years. No one's really going to become him, but you're not going to become a successful podcast in a short time. It takes that discipline of showing up daily, weekly, monthly, going through the struggles, going through the wins, the losses, and having the vision of what you're trying to accomplish, as opposed to where am I right now? It is not good enough. Okay, I'm just going to stop doing that.
Right.
Dude, I think about this all the time. Like, what if at the end of our life, we're like served two scenarios? It's like, this is what you could have been, and like this is where you ended up. Like, if you do that little thought experiment, it's kind of it hits you right in the feels, man, because it's like, what am I not doing right now that I should be to really get where I want to go? That's something that I think about quite a bit.
Yeah, it's a great conversation to have. Oftentimes, and you guys can appreciate this, is there's this massive misconception that especially like special operators or team guys are like these fearless individuals or these emotionless creatures, which of course the three of us in this room know is completely and totally false. What is, I would say, unique about us and our community, it's not that we get rid of emotion, it's that we learn to gain control over emotion. So those are two entirely separate things. But you bring up a great point, Greg, where it's, because people ask me like, what scares you? Do you experience fear? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. But it's also a tool. It's a weapon that you can use at your disposal. And to this particular point, one that I typically find myself wielding almost every day is the fear of regret. And this is exactly what we're talking about right now. And I have that little internal dialogue or that quick little vision of me on my deathbed, at hopefully like 100+ years old, surrounded by loved ones, or who knows how that plays out. But, and looking back and going, man, like, what if? Like, that question scares the shit out of me. What if? And it's not entirely about how much money you make or how big of a business you can build. It's also about, you as a person, and you as a family man, and as someone of high integrity, and someone with high character, and like, you did it the right way. And you can look back on those moments with pride, saying, no, I did give it my all. I truly did full send. Here. It worked there. It didn't work there, but I learned that at that point, and I pivoted to this. So fear is a powerful tool. And that's one that, again, I tend to use on myself in this scenario, multiple times a week.
I mean, that's one of my big ones is fear of letting other people around me down. I mean, you felt it in the teams all the time. You didn't want to be the person that messed up whether it's an actual op or a training exercise. You didn't want to be the one that let the team down during buds under the boat. You didn't want to be the guy slowing down the rest of the boat crew. I don't want to be the one that lets my wife and child down. Fear is a phenomenal motivator. As long as you use it in a constructive way and you don't let it derail you, and you just become so burdened by it that you don't even try anything anymore, because you become fearful of failure. That's I think where the distinction that people need to get away from is you don't want to be going through life not doing things because you don't want to fail, but you want to be pushing yourself to the point that you're not going to let other people down when it matters. It's a fine line, but I think it's a very powerful distinction to keep in mind.
Yeah, man, I can tell you, Kev, when the first year of me after being wounded, and then at Walter Reed, actually more than a year, probably about closer to 18 months, year at Walter Reed, back to Bragg, back to my unit. I'm going through a med board. I'm fighting to stay on active duty. I'm working as an instructor, teaching combatives and CQB. That duration of time, and even to when I started taking all these different assessments and tests to try to get back onto the team, I was fueled by a love of the game, by a passion for needing to get back to doing what I love, proving the naysayers wrong, proving myself right, kind of rage and anger, and I'm going to make you regret not killing me when you had the chance. Like, that's what drove me for over a year and a half time frame. And then at one point, as I'm going through, it ended up being about a 12-week phase of different assessments and tests. I would usually do like 2 to 4 a week as I'm trying to get back onto the team. I wake up in the middle of the night at like 2:30 in the morning, and I thought I was dying. And my now wife, we weren't married yet, she jumps up, she's next to me. She's like, do I call 911? Like, what do I do? I'm like, hold on, just like, give me a second. I'm trying to like get my bearings. I'm sweating, hot beating, like I'm on the verge of death. I get my bearings, and I realized that in that moment, I knew I was going back to a team. And I really hadn't thought about it that way up until that point. And the irony of that is I was around these guys almost every single day. Granted, I'm working as an instructor. They're doing the ODA life, but we're around. We're in the gym together daily. We're engaging. We're talking. They're checking up on me, blah, blah, blah. Like, we're physically in proximity to each other most days out of the week. But I really hadn't thought about the fact that I was going back to a team, because I was so obsessed with needing to do this for me. And I went into work the next day. I knocked on the team room door. I was like, guys, can I get 5 minutes? They're like, yeah, of course. What's up, man? I sit them all down, and I'm like, first off, I need to apologize to you guys. I felt like just such a giant piece of shit that a year and a half had gone by, and I had been killing myself to get back to them. And I really hadn't thought about their interests in this. After I apologize and they tell me to stop saying sorry, I'm like, listen, have you guys even like thought about wanting me back? Have you guys even thought this through? Because you're in the gym with me saying like, yeah, bro, you got this. Let's go. Like, get one more rep, blah, 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 blah. But like, have you really thought this through? And I got the same answer from every one of these guys. A couple of them were offsite training, so I get them on the phone. But I got the same answer from these guys, and they was like, look, dude, we don't know if this is going to work, but we want to be the ones to decide if it will. So if you're able to get back here by some crazy happenstance and you are unable to meet this standard, you know damn well that we are going to be the first people to let you know that, and then this will no longer be a place for you. And I was like, shit, you know what, guys? Like, you're right. And that allowed me to do a couple things, man. One, I was able to put my trust in them to maintain an objective perspective over my life in that arena because I'm so emotional about it. That objectivity and emotion are antagonistic of each other, right? When you're highly emotional, logic is almost completely out the window, and the other way around is if they're inverted. I'm so emotional. I'm obsessed with this thing that I had a really hard time seeing it objectively. Those guys could, and I knew that, so I could put my trust in these other 10, 11 dudes to be like, all right, you know what? I'm going to stay obsessed like I am on target. You guys will provide the objectivity, and I trust that you will. I know that you will. But then to this point, Kevin, to your point, now when I was walking into the gym for my third training session of the day, when I'm just beat to shit and every excuse is starting to sound the most convincing in those moments of weakness as to why you should take today off or only go 50% or blah, 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 blah. Now, rather than me thinking about this glorifying moment of getting off the C-130 with both fingers raised in the air like I'm back, now I'm thinking about my teammate's 5-year-old son. And I'm thinking about my teammate's wife. And it's like, no. Like this training session isn't about you. It's not even about the enemy that you want to go see again on the battlefield. It's about that person and the person that person relies on. That's who you're doing this for. And it took me to what was already a pretty high operating system to a whole nother stratosphere of productivity and output when I put them at the forefront of my mind as to why I was going to do this thing.
Yeah, I mean that's something that the three of us and any other team guy has been privileged to have, is that you're surrounded with these high achieving elite individuals who can frankly be honest. You know, we can take the rank off. We can have a candid conversation about who's fucking up, who's doing something right, who's doing something wrong, and we can be honest with each other in our assessment of how things are going. I feel like a lot of people today don't have that kind of audience and that kind of environment around them, where they're either surrounded by yes men who are like, oh yeah, yes, you can do that, you can do that, you can do it, you can be anything you want, you can be president, or the converse, where they're just in a entirely negative environment where everyone's trying to drag them down back to their level because they don't want to see someone else around them in their community be successful while they're being left behind. And so they're given false senses of what they can actually accomplish, whether it's they can do anything or they can do nothing. To being around SEALs, Green Berets, Air Force Special Operators, Marines, like the amount of honesty we can have with one another, and the knowledge that we want each other to be honest. We don't want you to blow smoke up our asses. We want to have that honest assessment of where we are, what we're able to do. And so, the fact that you recognize that you need to stop making this about yourself, you need to make it about your team. And then the team was able to step in and be like, yep, we got you. You keep working hard. You get where you need to be. We'll let you know if you're no longer meeting the mark.
Yeah. The power of community, man. The power of having a team around you. And like, you know, the lone wolf concept and the self-made concept, I appreciate the sentiment that I think goes along with that for many people. It's like the early mornings and the late nights and putting in the effort when no one else is around to give a shit about what you do and how you do it. That is a requirement. But if you try to take on the world alone, you will lose. I'll tell you who you're going to lose to. You're going to lose to the person or the organization that has the humility and the willingness to recognize their own gaps and deficiencies. So we're talking self-awareness and honesty, and then the proactiveness to go seek out assets to start filling in those gaps. That's who wins long term. You may win a couple battles here and there as this lone wolf. I'm going to take on the world by myself with the hoodie on my head and the headphones on and fuck everybody else. You may win a couple battles, but you will lose the war. And human beings, we are pack animals. We're like wolves. And this is rooted in us genetically as a means of survival, because thousands of years ago, when a saber-toothed tiger showed up, I had a much higher likelihood of surviving if it was me plus 50 versus me by myself. Like, that's not going away. And some are more comfortable in an isolated environment versus not. Different personality types, you know, alpha, beta, omega, all these different labels we have. But at the end of the day, human beings are built to operate as a team. And I think that the lack of such, which we've been blessed to be able to have, I say blessed, but also we had to work our asses off to earn our way into those teams. But we're also blessed to have them and had them and still have them in our lives to rely on and to give us candid, no shit feedback and support, and those better than us that help us dig in and find another gear to push, to be alongside, to earn the respect and right to operate alongside these other individuals. I would say in today's world, there's generally speaking a lack of that kind of community. There's a lack of that kind of team dynamic. And, I'm not anti-technology. You and we're leveraging the internet right now. We use social media all the time. I use all those tools and it's great, but it is creating a much more detached world. Ironically, the world's also gotten really, really small where you can find and connect to someone almost at any given time. It's like, it used to be 7 degrees of separation. Now it's like 2. So the world's gotten really, really small, but we're also at the same time getting more and more detached, meaning I don't need to rely on my next door neighbor for anything. Even just like 100 years ago, like that person was your life. That person was something that helped you survive and thrive. And when you needed something, that's where you went. You don't need that anymore, right? I can pick up this device right here. Boom, problem solved. So the detachment of us as individuals, because we're able to get social and knowledge engagement virtually, which is great, brings a lot of benefits, I would say at least lends to there being a lack of team and community dynamic within people's worlds, even though it's just that much easier to also find these communities that you could get yourself into, even if it's only 2-dimensionally.
Mm-hmm. And how are you using that to build your team now? You mentioned that you had no plans for being an entrepreneur, building a business, creating all this. It's been a progressive thing that you've just been taking advantage of as the situation arises. How have you been able to find the right people to be good advisors, be good operations people, manage a lot of the stuff? You're still an active Green Beret. You're a warrant officer, correct?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, the unicorns of the stock community. You guys
yeah, true.
No one knows what you guys actually do.
Exactly. We like it that way. We're going to keep it that way.
We're not going to go into that. We want to keep that secret. So you're obviously managing your military career. You have a lot of responsibilities on that side. So how are you finding the right people to manage your business and your brand and your image while you're not able to constantly be there, and to make sure that you end up on great shows like Harder Not Smarter?
Yeah.
We had a great conversation with your assistants and all that stuff. Like how have you been able to build out your team with people that you trust, that have had experience in this area?
Yeah, man, it's been a wild journey the last few years, but I'd say even still now, kind of a healthy combination of proactiveness and open-mindedness. I'm fortunate to exist in a space that really pulls on people's hearts and pulls on people's emotions, and people feel that. They feel the effect within themselves, and then they want more from you as a recipient. But then at some point, many are like, man, I want to be on the other side of this. I want to help do what you do, or be a part of creating what you guys have created for me. And that generates a lot of demand, which is great, and a lot of interest, which is great. So that coupled with, still having to be proactive, like, creating these like avatars or these straw men of a person that we know we've got a gap, and then start like actively pursuing to find someone that we think would be a good fit. So kind of doing both of those at the same time, which is great, and it requires a degree of humility in these things that we've talked about, where it's like, I can continue to read all the books and watch all the YouTube videos, but like it's impractical that I'm going to be like at an expert level or even remotely decent at like all these different things. So we need to find assets. And one of the trickier parts of that, especially when you're in love with it, and it's largely about you as this like public figure, right? Like a lot of it is about me as a person. And I have a high standard for like what we do and how we do it. Empowering others to do things is a really easy thing to say and like nod your head at and be like, yeah, it's an important thing. It's part of leadership and team building and success and all these different things. But when you actually need to go do it, it can be really hot, because you've got this vision in your mind of what ideal looks like, and a high degree of confidence that if I do it myself, I feel like I'm going to get close to that 100%, maybe 92, 93. Like I'll get real close if I do it myself. But there's only one of you, and there's all these different things. So you have to, at some point, begin empowering other people to make decisions and to take that vision and that commander's intent and kind of make it their own and go create something. And for me, one of the challenges has been, and I'm still learning to be better at it, is, an 80 or so percent solution that's coming from somebody else is a win. And like that 20% margin, like that's the cost of me being able to do more things and focus on the bigger picture and whatever, and having these assets on this team. And that, that's again, easier said than done, but that it's a critical part of the growth process, certainly in business, but really within most facets of our lives. It's having people that want to be around us, and you keep them there by taking good care of them, by being good people, by putting character and integrity and values and morals at the forefront of just the way you live. But then you got to extend the ability for them to do those things. Go out there, you give them the guidance, you communicate your vision the best you can, and then your operators go and operate. And I'm just blessed to have so many people that want to be a part of this, because it had not been for them, if it wasn't for them, man, there's no way I'm able to do both of these professions at the same time. And I'm able to do that now because I've got such amazing humans that want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
I got a question for you, Nick. So at the very beginning of this call or this podcast, you talked about who you were, after the injury, and like you were only a Green Beret. How has that changed over the course of, the last few years, or when did it start changing, or when did that start evolving? What does that look like today? Like, how has your sense of identity changed over time? Because I think that's such an important conversation for so many veterans. Because I know me personally, I was the same way. Like when I was a Green Beret, that's who I was. It's like, honestly, like still a very big part of like who I am. I attribute everything that I do today to being a Green Beret.
Right.
Well, I've been able to, I've been better at separating myself from that. I still like it's in my core. That is who I am or who I was, and it still is runs deep inside me to this day.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this, man, because it's an important discussion, and I can tell you, like the most significant catalyst within that transition was not just the birth of my oldest son. I have two kids, two boys. Our oldest is 7, our youngest is 3. They're both absolute animals, and the highlight of my life, my wife and those two other human beings. I'm so fortunate to have them. The introduction of him into my world is what began kind of this shift. And it was really actually before he was born. In fact, I know the exact day because I created myself very rudimentary with my non-existent art skills, the first like logo that I ever created. That is one that we use now, and it's been redone by actual professionals at this point. But it was 3 days before my son was born, and I was up late. I had trouble sleeping. And I had this like idea in my mind about like, the term legacy. And I just couldn't get off this topic. And up until that point in my mind, like the term legacy was very egocentric. It was arrogant. It was like self-centered, almost conceited that you would even be thinking about like creating this legacy so that others can worship you after you're dead. And I saw it as almost like a negative character trait, if I'm being perfectly honest with you guys. And it's 3 days before my son's about to be born, and I'm kind of struggling with this thought. And I was like, shit, you know what, man? It's not about living a certain way or creating something so that strangers build a monument to you and they come and light candles and like do a ceremony in your honor of people that you've never met before. It's about how you're remembered by those that you love and that love you. And knowing I was about to become a father in 36 hours is what triggered that for me. So a couple things happened in that moment. One was my perception of legacy really began to shift. 2 was, man, like I have to be more than a Green Beret. Like that will forever remain a huge part of who I am and what has molded me and my character and the way I live throughout all aspects of my life. That will forever remain a huge chunk of who I am. But I can't just be that. Like there has to be more to me than that. Like you're a husband, you're about to be a father. Like what else is possible? Like where else can this go? So that began to change my perception of how much my profession was part of who I was. And then lastly, it was in that same vein, it was like, maybe there's something else here that you can do to help inspire and educate and empower and enable other people. That was the beginning of what is today, my company and the things I get to do as an entrepreneur. That was where it began. So there was there's a few kind of moving pieces happening at the same time on the same day, 3 a.m., 3 days before my oldest was born was a pretty significant moment for that shift.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah. The shift of identity for a lot of guys leaving the military is honestly
especially soft.
Yeah.
It's honestly what drives a lot of us to have that lack of sense or purpose after we get out. So the fact that you've been able to build it all in to who you are before you even leave is a remarkable achievement. And I mean, I'm sure your book spells it out well of how you've been able to do that. Your team with Team Machine are doing a remarkable job of getting you out, telling your story. Your social media has continued that trend as well of getting people the discipline, or giving people the foundational, the blueprint for building that discipline, and creating that identity, and really understanding who you are as a person instead of what you do. So we really appreciate everything you've been doing. I know that we have to get you off in the next way, so I want to give you an opportunity to talk about any of the services you offer, the type of people that you're looking to support, where to get your book, any social media you have, before we sign off.
Yeah, man. I mean, I appreciate it. The one-stop shop for all of our stuff is teammachine.com. Machine is spelled MCHN, and it's got links to the merch and the offerings, keynotes and inspirational talks and training workshops. One of our more recent offerings, per what we were talking about earlier, is what we call the Forge, which is a virtual coaching and community platform. And it's our first swing at providing people a team dynamic that they can involve themselves into, with high achieving individuals that are going to hold them accountable and provide, daily guidance, strength and conditioning programming, nutrition. It's a pretty wide net of different subject matter expert coaches that we have that we get to work with to provide daily value to our members. That's our current kind of big push to try to give that community option to people, like we were talking about earlier. So yeah, I mean, if anyone's interested, check it out. That's the spot to go. But I do want to close here quick. I know we got a couple minutes. And I'm not going to speak on behalf of both of you, but I'm fairly confident that I'm going to see some heads bobbing between you two studs here in a second. And I spoke on it a bit earlier, but there's also, this somewhat massive misconception about team guys and kind of the way we live, and that, it's like something you see out of a movie where, like, we get home from work and we go into this like one room studio apartment and we sit in a chair and put sunglasses on our face and like shut down like robots and wait for some like pager to go off, and then we spring up and then go like kill people. It's like, you and I, we're all laughing about this, but you guys know that there's this like idea about that. And that's cool. And like, I get it. I grew up watching, Rambo and John Wayne and like all the cool guy SEAL movies and shit. So like, I get all that. But what I like to emphasize, especially to any young person that's listening to this, that may even have a potential idea of wanting to get into the soft community, is that most of us are older individuals. Most of us have families. Most of us have spouses. Most of us have kids. This is just math. This is just statistics. This isn't even my opinion. This is just the truth of who makes up the operators, the actual team guys in our world. And, we strap it on and we go to work for set duration of time, whether it's a training event for a week, or you're going to your home station to go hit some flat ranges, or you're going to go overseas for 6 months. We go to work for a set duration, and then we come home, and we're pretty normal guys when we get home, and we've got all the challenges and responsibilities and friction points. We make all the same mistakes that everyone else makes as we're trying to figure out how to improve ourselves and our family's well-being, and then still perform at a high level with our job. That is the basic breakdown of most guys that do some of this kind of holy shit type work. Is we're people. We're not robots. We're not cyborgs. We have emotion. We have other people that we care about. We experience fear, and we procrastinate, and we get things wrong, and we feel pain, and all of the things that whomever I'm talking to right now, experiences. All three of us that are on this call have experienced it, and we'll continue to do so because we're human beings. We've just simply chosen to be different and to make different decisions than most, have different ideas, think a different way, and then more importantly, do things differently. And it's a complete and total option for anybody out there that is willing to be different. The only question is, how different are you willing to be, and how bad do you want it?
I mean, I can't think of any
Fucking
better way to sum
mic
up this episode.
drop, baby.
Send it right there.
Yep.
There it is.
Boom.
Yep.
Hey guys, I appreciate. Oh, and we got the fireworks to close
Fucking
this thing out.
fireworks,
with
dude.
the effects, guys. I appreciate what you guys do. I appreciate both your service. The podcast is great. So at a minimum, you got a new fan for life. I know how hot it is, and you guys are in that grind, and you're making a difference. It's a privilege, and I'm humbled to have been a small part of it, man. So appreciate what you guys do, man. I'll be listening and looking forward to the next one.
Oh yeah, appreciate you, Nick.
Thanks, guys.